book of Nehemiah. Last week, there wasn't enough time to cover the introduction as to where it all starts. So this evening, we're going to be finishing up the introduction to the book of Nehemiah and how Ezra, 2nd Chronicles, and Esther interconnect with each other. Last week we were able to see how Jeremiah spoke about how the Babylonian kingdom was going to be judged, and then how the people, God's people, were all taken into captivity. And out of that captivity, there came a song, which is the Psalm 137. But in reality, they were mocking the people as they were asking them to sing a song. And Psalm 137 came out of that, saying, how can we sing a song when we have sorrowful and broken hearts? So last week, we were in the book of 2nd Chronicles. So what we left out was in 2nd Chronicles chapter 36. Let's go back to 2nd Chronicles chapter 36 so that we can continue understanding Nehemiah. So 2nd Chronicles 36, we left off in verse 22. But for context, we'll start at verse 20. He carried into exile to Babylon the remnant who escaped from the sword, and they became servants to him and his successor until the kingdom of Persia came to power. The land enjoyed its Sabbath rest. All the time its desolation and rested until the 70 years were completed in fulfillment of the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah. In the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord spoken to Jeremiah, the Lord moved the heart of Cyrus, king of Persia, to make a proclamation throughout the realm, and also to put in writing. Verse 23, this is what Cyrus, king of Persia says. The Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdom of the earth and has appointed me to build a temple for him at Jerusalem in Judah. Any of his people among you may go up, and may the Lord their God be with them. In the book of Ezra is what we see that the temple is being built, and it gets built. But there's still many things to be completed, because when they went back, that was the only thing that they were able to complete. When the people went back, they wanted to rebuild the walls, but there was much opposition from all the enemies surrounding them. But at the same time, there was people that came that wanted to help them rebuild the wall. The only thing was that these people were not worshiping only the Lord. They were also worshiping other gods. And Ezra took a stand and said, you have no part in us, with us, because you worship other gods. That is in Ezra 3 and 4. You have no part with us. There was not too long ago, recently here in San Antonio, a conference inviting all the churches, any denomination. They invited the pastors actually to come together and pray. I'm talking about Jewish church, Catholic, Christian churches. And the main thing was, let's pray for our nation, which is good. We should be praying for our nation. But another goal that they have behind this is that we should all religions, all denominations should live in harmony. I'm pretty sure you've seen those stickers, bumper stickers that says coexist. Well, that may be a good intention, good thing. that cannot be, because every religion, they worship something different other than the true God, the true Lord. And that is who we worship. And that's what Ezra took a stand when he said, no, you have no part in us. We're supposed to build the wall. We're supposed to build the temple. That was Ezra. The book of Ezra is the temple of God. And Nehemiah is the walls. And then Cyrus, he wasn't a believer, but he acknowledged that God had given him this task. There were two types of exodus that happened. I explained that last week. How the first one, when they came out of Egypt, they were taken out of Egypt. And then later on, they were taken into captivity again by Nebuchadnezzar. And there's three instances when they come back. When they're taken out of captivity. The first one was, of course, with Moses. And after that, there was another time when they came back to start rebuilding the city and the walls and the temple. That was under the command of Zerubbabel. And he's mentioned in Haggai 2 and Zechariah. Actually, let's turn to Zechariah, the book of Zechariah. The book of Zechariah, chapter 4, he mentions how he's going to use God. God, is going to use certain people. In Zechariah chapter 4, beginning in verse 6, he says, so he said to me, this is the word of the Lord to Zerubbabel, not by might nor by power, but my spirit, says the Lord Almighty. What are you, mighty mountain? Before Zerubbabel you will become level ground. Then he will bring out the capstone to shout, oh God bless it, God bless it. Then the word of the Lord came to me. The hands of Zerubbabel have laid the foundation of his temple. His hands will also complete it. Then you will know that the Lord Almighty has sent me to you. Verse 10, who dares despise the day of small things? Since the seven eyes of the Lord that range throughout the earth will rejoice when they see the chosen capstone in the land of Zerubbabel. So, there's certain people that God is using. And just like when Esther had the opportunity, and she could have backed out, but her cousin Mordecai says, if you don't do it, somebody else will. God will still use somebody else. You have the opportunity. You have the opportunity. We have the opportunity to do something for God. And if we don't do it, He's still going to get His will done through somebody else. And then, years later, Ezra was called. And he came under the command of Artaxerxes. I can't pronounce his name. By this time, King Cyrus was dead. So it had been about 80 years later when all this happened. And it's mentioned in Zechariah. And then after Ezra came and he started rebuilding the temple, 13 years later, Nehemiah comes onto the scene. So back in 536, Zerubbabel came. Then 456, Ezra. And then 443, Nehemiah came. This is a time when the people were coming back and they were in captivity. Of course, we already know that. But they were coming back and the temple was already built. But they were coming back and they could see that the city was still destroyed. It was still in ruins. And there weren't any typical little walls that we see now in like gated communities. These were massive walls. They could take, we right here on I-37 or 281 have 3 lanes going one way and 3 lanes going the opposite way. Those walls could have taken both lanes on top of the wall and still have enough room for other people to be walking by. That's how big the walls were. So now, let's start in Nehemiah chapter 1, verse 1. As it says, the words of Nehemiah, son of Hekeliah, in the month Kislev, in the 20th year, while I was in citadel of Susa, Hanani, one of my brothers, came to Judah with some other men, and I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that had survived the exile, and also about Jerusalem. They said to me, those who survived the exile are back in the province, are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates have been burnt with fire. When I heard these things, I sat down and wept. So the month Kislev is about around the end of November, mid-December. And he says it's in the 20th year of the reign of this king. So around this time, people came from Jerusalem to tell him. Now we know, if we skip down all the way at the end of the chapter, it says that I was the cupbearer to the king. In other words, he had a high-ranking position. And see, God always has somebody in place at the right time, at the right place. So though the people were in distress, there was still hope there. God had a plan ready. I mean, God has always a plan. He doesn't get taken by surprise. He doesn't say, oh man, I didn't plan on, Adam and Eve eating the fruit. Oh, I forgot the Jordan River was there. How are they going to cross now? I didn't know they were going to kill Jesus. So God always has a plan. We know later on, as we progress in the book, that Nehemiah has 3 different hats that he wears. And for us men and ladies too, we have different hats that we wear throughout our lives. When we're first born, we're sons and daughters of somebody. Later on, we become brothers and sisters. Later on, we become fathers. We become managers. We become supervisors, teachers, governors, whatever. We have different responsibilities. In Nehemiah, the first part of the book, he's the cupbearer. And being a cupbearer wasn't a position that people were lining up outside of the door and say, that's what I want to be when I grow up. Because being a cupbearer meant that if somebody was trying to kill the king by poisoning him through the food or a drink, you were going to die first. Because the cupbearer would need to taste the food before it was given to the king. But at the same time, he had insight into the most intimate parts of the king's thoughts. He was the number 1 advisor. In the second part of the book, you could say he was a general contractor, a builder. He spent a lot of time at the castle, but later on we see that he becomes a general contractor, getting people together to do a certain job. In the third part of the book, we see that he's the governor of the city. he gets elected, and right away he starts appointing people, the right people. So many of us have different roles, different responsibilities. I'm a father, I'm a pastor, I have a job, I'm a supervisor, but I'm also under authority where I work at. And God chooses, or He gives certain gifts to certain people to fill these roles. But at the same time, He equips you or equips us for certain tasks. Now Nehemiah heard the cry of the people, and right away it became a burden into his heart. He didn't just say, well, since I have connections with the king, let me send somebody. Let me get somebody to go do a cleanup. And then also the first chapter, the first verse says that he's the son of Hekeliah. Who's Hekeliah? We don't know. This is the first time and only time that the name appears in the Bible. But imagine if later on, 30, 40, 50 years later on, you have a son. And then you say, the son of whoever, the governor of Texas, or the president of the United States. There's a reason why their names were saved in the Bible. And these were people, just common folks. They were nobody else, nobody high ranking other than the position that God gave them. So he was in the citadel, in the capital Susa. And this capital appears years earlier with Queen Esther. But now, not only is it the capital of Jerusalem, but it's the capital of the world. Because everything is centralized to what's going on. Everything at this time that was happening around the world had something to do with Jerusalem, with the citadel or the capital here, or Susa. So that means that 20 years before Nehemiah steps into the scene, we know Queen Esther. And I'm pretty sure somehow he met Queen Esther or heard of her. It doesn't make mention, he doesn't make mention about it. In this book, I'm pretty sure he's the writer. Doesn't say he is, but I'm pretty sure he's the writer, Nehemiah. Now, in verse 2, it says, the Hanani, one of my brothers, and it's believed that he was a blood brother, so a natural brother. One of my brothers came from Judah with some other man, and I questioned him about the Jewish remnant that had survived the exile, and also about Jerusalem. So he's asking two questions. What's going on with the people, and what's going on with the city? What's going on with the people? Well, depression started to set in because they came back to the city and it's in ruins. They're trying to rebuild it, but they have opposition. You know, how many of us have decided to do something, planned out something, or we feel a calling, but then there's opposition? Most of us are Hispanics here, and we already are, I would say, way too humble. Well, that's one thing that I've learned as the years, not that I'm smart, but I've noticed that we settle for very little. We don't have many aspirations, many of us don't. And whenever you try to do something above what you can do, above what your parents have been able to do, then other people will look at you and put you down. Like, you can't achieve that. You don't have money, you don't have a college degree. Or we will ourselves put ourselves down also. Because we'll look at our siblings, we'll look at our family history, or we'll look at our immediate friends, and we'll say, well, this is all I can be. Verse 3. They said to me, those who survived the exile and are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. Again, depression has set in. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates have been burnt with fire. Now, back in Jeremiah 52, Nebuchadnezzar had already burned down his walls. But these walls were not the same ones that Nehemiah is talking about. It was the same city, but they couldn't abandon these walls because this happened 100 and some years before Nehemiah was even born. So if these were the same walls, he couldn't have been burdened by it because he had already grown up knowing that the walls were broken down. Let's turn to Jeremiah 52. Jeremiah chapter 52, starting in verse 12. It says, on the 10th day of the 5th month, in the 90th year of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, Nebuzaradan, commander of the imperial guard, who served the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem. He set fire to the temple of the Lord, the royal palace, and all the houses of Jerusalem. Every important building he burned down. 14. The whole Babylonian army under the commander of the imperial guard broke down all the walls around Jerusalem. So here, under Nebuchadnezzar, the walls were burned down. So these 150 years ago, well, the walls already burned down. These walls that we're talking about that Nehemiah had the burden for already being rebuilt. But something else happened along the way, and he knows about this. He knows what's going on. And for that, again, let's go back a little bit further in Ezra. Let's go back to Ezra in chapter 4. To know what walls they're talking about. Starting in verse 1 of Ezra. When the enemies of Judah and Benjamin heard that the exiles were building a temple for the Lord, the God of Israel, they came to Zerubbabel and to the heads of the families and said, let us help you rebuild, because like you, we seek God and have sacrificing to him since the time of Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, who brought us fire. This is what I was talking about, how people wanted to help them out. The Assyrians were worshiping the Lord, but at the same time they were worshiping other gods. But Zerubbabel, Joshua, and the rest of the heads of the families of Israel answered, you have no part with us in building the temple to our God. We alone will build it for the Lord, the God of Israel, as King Cyrus, the king of Persia, commanded us. Then the peoples around them set out to discourage the people of Judah and make them afraid to go on building. They bribed officials to work against them and frustrate their plans during the entire reign of Cyrus, king of Persia, and down to the reign of Darius, king of Persia. Opposition. Putting them down. You can't do it. You're not going to finish it. There's no way. At the beginning of the reign of Xerxes, they lodged an accusation against the people of Judah in Jerusalem. And in the days of Artaxerxes, king of Persia, Bishlam, Mithridates, Tabeel, and the rest of associates wrote a letter to Artaxerxes. The letter was written in an Aramaic script and in the Aramaic language. Raham, the commanding officer, and Shimshai, the secretary, wrote a letter against Jerusalem to Artaxerxes, the king, as follows. Rahab, the commanding officer of Shimshai, the secretary, together with the rest of her associates, the judges, officials, and administrators over the people of Persia, Uruk, and Babylon, the Elamites of Susa, and the other people whom the great and honorable Ashurbanipal deported and settled in the city of Samaria and elsewhere in Trans-Euphrates. To King Artaxerxes, from your servants in Trans-Euphrates, the king should know that the people who came up to us from you have gone to Jerusalem and are rebuilding that rebellious and wicked city. They are restoring the walls and repairing the foundations. Furthermore, the king should know that if the city is built and its walls restored, no more taxes, tribute, or duty will be paid, and eventually royal revenues will suffer. Now, since we are under obligation to the palace, it is not proper for us to see the king dishonored. We are sending this message to inform the king, so that a search may be made in the archives of your predecessors. And these records, you will find that this city is a rebellious city, troublesome to the kings and province, a place with a long history of sedition. That is why the city was destroyed. We informed the king that if this city is built and its walls are restored, you will be left with nothing in Trans-Euphrates. So they were discouraging the king from allowing this, but at the same time they were discouraging the other people from continuing on rebuilding this. They were saying, look, these people are rebellious. If they go on and finish the temple, they go on and finish the walls, they're not going to be paying you any more taxes. They're going to rebel against you. They're not going to obey you. The king sent his reply to Rahab, the commanding officer, Shimshai, the secretary, and the rest of his associates living in Samaria and elsewhere in Trans-Euphrates. Greetings. The letter you sent us has been read and translated in my presence. I issued an order and a search was made, and it was found that this city has a long history of revolt against kings and has been a place of rebellion and sedition. Jerusalem has had powerful kings ruling over the whole of Trans-Euphrates, and taxes, tribute, and duty were paid to them. Now, issue an order to these men to stop. This is key. He said stop. He told them to stop work, so that this city will not be rebuilt until I so order. Be careful not to neglect this matter. Why let this threat grow to the detriment of the royal interest? As soon as the copy of the letter of King Artaxerxes was read to Rahab and Shimshai, the secretary and their associates, they went immediately to the Jews in Jerusalem and compelled them by force to stop. They forced them to stop. Thus, the work of the house of God in Jerusalem came to a standstill until the second year of the reign of Darius. So they forced them. Not only did they tell them to stop, but they forced them. Later on, we can continue on reading, that they set fire to the walls. They destroyed it, and they set fire to the walls. So now we know that Nehemiah knew about these walls. Now, reading verse 1 through 3, it makes more sense as to why Nehemiah wept over this. Because now this is close to home. And though Nehemiah was at the castle with the king, his heart was always in Jerusalem. And because he knew that these walls were broken down purposely, because that's not what the king said. The king simply said, tell them to stop until I order later on a decree. But they went ahead and destroyed the walls and set fire. I was born in Mexico. In my hometown, I haven't been back for about 10 years or so. The reason that is because there's so much crime, so much corruption from the government. And though it's beautiful, no, I'm not talking about just across the border. It's a different scenery once you go further into Mexico. But because there's so much corruption, so much negative things happening, I haven't gone back, though I still would like to someday go back. I think that's what was going on in Nehemiah's heart. He saw the situation. Those were his people. And he saw how much they were suffering, even more so after his brother came and told them, they're crying, they're broken down. But these people have had so much opposition that anytime they wanted to do something, people were putting them down. You know, we all know who Walt Disney is. He was fired from many different places. He went broke, and people would tell him, just stop. We know now what Walt Disney stands for. Babe Ruth, we know him that he holds the greatest home run record, but before that, he had the record for the most strikeouts. And we know who Elvis Presley is. Before he became famous, the manager or owner of the Grand Ole or Prix, I can't pronounce it right, he told him, you ain't never going anywhere. Just go back to driving trucks, son. And then Thomas Edison, 2,000 times it took him to make the light bulb. And people would ask him, why did you fail 2,000 times? He said, no, I didn't fail 2,000 times. I just found 2,000 different ways not to make a light bulb. So how many times are people going to be putting us down? Or are we going to allow them to put us down? What about the burden that God has placed in your heart? The calling that He has, or that dream that you've had for so long that now you look back like, man, I should have done that back then. But God always has the right person at the right time in the right place. And that could be us right now. Whatever it is that He wants to do through us. It's up to us to answer that call and actually follow through with it. Let's pray.